A few days ago, the data mines for the March season of Marvel Snap dropped. It looks like it's themed around the big bad himself, Apocalypse, and introduces an entirely new mechanic to the game. Let's check it out. The season pass card is En Sabanur, who transforms into Apocalypse Celestial's Chosen when you fill up your front row at every location. Now, this transforming is accomplished by the new mechanic that is called Objective. From what I can tell, it's a quest. You do the thing, the card transforms. There are a couple things that we're not positive about the implementation of here, but we can guess. Objective, I don't think means that it needs to have happened while the card is on the field, or I should say, it probably will count if you play the card and your objective has already been completed. What we don't know about is timing. When does an objective happen? If you play this card and it goes face up and it sees you have all of those front row cards, does it transform immediately? Does it transform at the end of the turn? That kind of stuff does matter for timing, but it might not be the most important thing in many cases. Largely, though, this is just a way for them to print cards that have a thing that you have to do in order to get the payoff from them that is not as directly, do this and get 3 points of green power on this card the way Thena is. So let's take a look at the backside, which is a 4/7 that swaps the lowest power card in your front row with a card in your deck. So it's effectively, the way I read this card, since I think the quest is so easy to complete, is just 4/7 that turns your hood into something else. That's mostly what I read here, which really I think goes to show just how good Misery is as a card. But I think that this kind of card is honestly a pretty reasonable and powerful alternative. You have a full front row, you get rid of your hood, you get rid of really whatever it is that you want to get rid of, and then boom, you have something better coming out of the deck. Note that this does not have blink text, it just has text that pulls something out of the deck. So it's more like an on-reveal lockjaw most of the time, I think, because I think most of the time you're going to be playing this card, it'll have the ability to have its effect. Sometimes you're not, but mostly this reads to me as 4/7 Lockjaw, which is probably a pretty reasonable thing to be doing. Like, when you think about what the ramp deck is currently doing, you can do a lot of cool stuff with a card like this. It's just, you might have to devote your power in ways you don't necessarily want to, so it might not fit in the ramp deck. But maybe it goes in a more mid-rangey kind of deck. Maybe you can play it in some sort of hood mid-range deck. That's a time-honored archetype to play. The problem is, I'm not sure this card ends up outscaling what the current versions of those hood mid-range decks do. You'll notice that a lot of decks just are not in the business of 4-drops unless those 4-drops are completely bat-crap broken. And that means that this guy might end up a little bit low. He reads to me like a good card, but a good card might not be enough for this guy to actually hit the way you'd want him to hit. Next up is Iska the Unbroken, a 3/2 end of turn. If you're losing this location, double this card's power. I think this card, contrary to her name, is actually quite broken. And as I say this, I realize that her name is actually Iska the Unbeaten, which means that this whole gag doesn't work anymore, but I'm leaving it in the video regardless so you can point and laugh in the comments. That said, Iska the Unbeaten is a character whose mutant power is to never lose. This is a very in-flavor build here, but I also think it's probably an unprintably good card. This card needs to, at a minimum, cost more. Just sort of fundamentally, the dynamic that this card has is oppressively powerful, and that's not even getting into, like, oh, not Shadow King. Yes, that is a good card against here. Oh, Invisible when First Steps exists. Cool, great. So what I'm going to do with this card is on the final turn of the game, I've set up my Invisible when First Steps combo. This card just wins a lane. That's what it says. It says win a lane. If you have enough triggers of this with Invisible when First Steps, it says win a lane. And that's not getting into the 75 different ways we as players have to copy or duplicate or do any of these things to effects like this. This card is too good to print at 3. But even just at baseline, the dynamic of this card is actually really interesting to me because it means that you want to invest in making the lane weaker, right? So maybe you're playing like void stuff and hood stuff and putting it there, and maybe you're using Apocalypse later in the game to flip that stuff out, or maybe you're not. It's an interesting dynamic, because if you're investing in making your lane weaker so you get a bunch of Iska procs, well, then you get really, really hosed by the Shadow King. So I think this card is quite strong, just as a baseline. If you're losing this location, double this card's power. I don't think you can put that on a 3. But I do think that it is a very interesting card that probably doesn't have unprintable text. It just has unprintable text at 3 in the context of Invisible Woman. That's really what I'm getting at here. I don't think this card is that busted compared to, say, Juggernaut. And I mean the Juggernaut that currently exists in the game, not the Juggernaut that we're going to be talking about later in this video. I just think that, like, it is a very powerful on its face mechanic to have, but a little less powerful than it reads. I don't think it's impossible to print this card. I do think it's probably a mistake at 3-2. Juggernaut Horseman of War, a 2-2 with an objective that says have 7 different powers among your cards in play and gain 6 power. So largely, if you're just playing a deck which plays cards that have different power, this guy is just kind of a 2-8. But I'm not sure he's as free as you would want him to be. Whether this guy is good depends on a couple of things. Like, first of all, if it's really easy to trigger this guy, which I think in deck building you probably can do without giving up too much. Like, I think you will be able to play decks that are just entire deck is different cards of different powers. Or you should be able to do that. I think it is very possible. And I think there are decks that are going to care about this. But the more fundamental question I have about this card is a 2-8 even good? And I don't know what it means that I have to ask that question, but I think it's representative of the increased focus on synergy pieces that Marvel Snap has gotten. In a previous metagame, I think this card would be a pretty easy slam dunk in, like, the sort of Angela and Tech mid-range decks, because those are decks that really do want a 2-8, right? Those decks don't exist anymore. Everything is like, oh, I'm going to play Xiao Lao and then multiply the synergy of his buff with a Maverick. And when you're doing that, a 2-8 is completely worthless. And so you have this card that I think maybe is like a little bit of a canary in the coal mine, where, like, if people look at this card and they see, okay, you know, a 2-8, that's not that exciting. I don't know what it means that they can print a 2-8, and my reaction to it is that's probably not that great. But it doesn't mean anything good, probably. Like, I think it's probably indicative of, like, maybe tech needs a buff. Like, if I'm looking at a 2-8, that there's really not a lot of ways of interacting with, it's just like, oh, that's a 2-8 that you get for building your deck in a certain way. And you're probably, again, like, I'm not positive. In my head, though, it seems like it's relatively easy to make this condition happen. I kind of think we might have gone too far in the synergy direction. If you're looking at how Marvel Snap looks, if you can't print the 2-8 and have it be exciting, it's the responsibility of all these sort of, like, multiplicative synergy things like V-Hand Frigga or Invisible Woman Jocasta or Xiao Lao and Maverick or Xiao Lao and Scarlet Spider. Like, all of that stuff just sort of makes a good 2-8 look embarrassing. And I think that that's largely the dynamic I'm speaking to here. Gambit, in character as the Horseman of Death, is a deeply annoying card, just as current Gambit is. A 3-4 with an objective, play 6 total cost of created cards. Then, when you have done this, randomly destroy 4 total cost of enemy cards. This is where I think objective starts to be like, all right, what does it actually mean? Does this card have to see you play 6 total cost of created cards? Do you have to do that after Gambit is on the board? Because the other objective cards we've looked at here are objective cards that look at a static situation. They look at your board, and it's just a yes or no check, right? This card looks at a potentially dynamic situation. Does the game even track how many cards what total cost of cards you've played when this guy's not on the board? I don't know. And I think if it does, I can see this card being a pretty legitimately powerful thing to do. V-Hand, already a powerful archetype. This is a card that, to me, seems very worth copying. Like, if you wanted a second Frigga target, you can just blow up a lot of your opponent's stuff by playing this. This is also a card that gives V-Hand outs in ways like Thing First Steps does, where it's like, sometimes there's just cards that can't, or decks that can't really get through like a Cosmo in a Cerebro matchup, right? This does. It just does do that. I think this is a really interesting card that, to me, honestly might be pretty damn good. Like, I realize it's not the greatest thing in the world, but if you're already going to be a deck that completes the condition, and if the condition is being tracked while this guy's not on the board, and I guess it also means, like, depending on what Quinjet does with this, like, how is it tracking cost here? Are we talking about the cost of the card you play? Like, does a Valentina just automatically finish this quest for you? Or does that count for 4? I don't know. But that kind of stuff, this guy seems pretty good. Like, if Valentina works, you do Valentina, you play this, you play the 6, and then you just nuke your opponent's entire first 2 turns of the game, probably? That seems pretty good to me. That seems like a really powerful thing to be doing. A card tailor-made for me to go do about Sandstorm honestly looks like one of the strongest cards in this entire season. They are doing a bit of a rock sub-theme this season. There's a couple of other cards that are probably worth talking about. But when I look at this card, I see a really cool, really clever design. Because, first of all, at maximum, what this says is 2 energy, get 2 demons. It's not always going to be like that, but it can certainly look that way. And I also think there's a couple of things that depend on like how certain things are implemented. But as I understand it, if you have enough skills in hand, you put this down and it reveals first. I think face down skills at the other locations might count, because the biggest thing this is going to do, and it's actually, this is why I think this is so clever. If you're a V-Hand deck, you already struggle with board space and point allocation. That is exacerbated by this, because in order to get the payoff from this, you have to commit bad units to multiple lanes. And that's really interesting. Like, that's a really interesting dynamic. I think this card, that's the biggest thing that V-Hand already does poorly. And what a lot of go-wide decks do poorly is card quality at individual lanes. And so this is saying, like, lean into that, but you're going to cap yourself in terms of total output, even though I'm going to give you the ability to put a lot of power in all 3 lanes, because this basically just says get 2 demons if you do it right. I think it's a really interesting card. I think it's potentially a really strong card. Like, just based on V-Hand alone, I think this is a reasonable card. There's also other rock synergy in the season that we're going to get to in a little bit. This looks to me like a standout. Caliban Horseman of Pestilence is just a test of, like, how good is a 3/11? Like, that's what this card says, right? Because there are Wiccan Ajax decks. And if you're playing a Wiccan Ajax decks, you play a 3/11 that does what this does. Because the trigger here is 3 cards that cost 4 or more. So you're going to do that, right? That's going to happen. Which means 3 cards that cost 4 or more is a pretty easy thing to make happen in a Wiccan Ajax deck. So you're probably just playing this as a 3/11. And it's probably going to be pretty good as a 3/11. Like, I really don't even know that there's more to say about this. Like, this is the 3/11 that goes in the Wiccan Ajax deck. And that's it. That's what it does. You play this guy on turn 3, and then later in the game, he just, like, Omega Sentinel zaps somebody for -7. That's dope. That's just a good card. I'm interested in this guy. The better question would be, like, what the hell else does he do? Is this just like a 3/11 that goes in every Wiccan deck? I could buy that too. I think that this is, more than anything else, I kind of think this is just a Wiccan card. This is just a 3-drop that you put in your Wiccan deck, and it's 11 power. And it's like, oh, that's like speed, but a little bit better. Boom. Done. Make it happen. I buy this. I legitimately do. I just think this guy is going to be like a pretty reasonable card for a deck like that. I just don't know that a deck like that can exist. But if I'm doing something like this, here's something that occurs to me is like, I want to play this in my Aurora deck. She doesn't count objective. Are they going to update her to count objective? They need to do that. They should do that. They should let her count objective. They need to give that They need to give that to my girl. Because I would play this in an Aurora deck. An Aurora Wiccan deck with this, I am super into that conceptually. They should make that happen. Selene might be the card that makes me the happiest in the entire season, which is have 3 cards with no abilities in play. That's the quest condition. The result is steal 5 power from an enemy card at her location. So she's a 4/13. And she's a 4/13 in Patriot. And I think that's awesome because I think that getting synergies for a deck like Patriot is one of the coolest possible things you can do. Just sort of baseline, just a couple of things that just trigger this for free. Ultron comes to mind. Demons have no abilities. The rocks off Sandstorm have no abilities. This is doing stuff. This card is doing stuff. Like, you're gonna be able to make this one happen, and it's a really cool way to try to do this. I do think that Patriot itself is a little weak for this card to be a Patriot card, but I kind of can totally see being like Demons, and there's another rock card that we're probably going to play with it. Like this, Demons, rocks, and then just Ultron means that you get it for free on the back end of every game. I think that's probably just a really reasonable thing to be doing, and I'm just really happy to see them make a card for Patriot. Now, my one piece of advice would be they should probably buff Patriot while they're at it. The other of my favorite cards in the season is Ozymandias. Of course, the King of Kings. Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair. Or, if you will, I did it 35 minutes ago. This is a 5/10 with an ongoing ability that gives your rocks +3 power. I love that. I just love it. Like, I love every part of this card. This is a card where you look at it and you're like, why hasn't this been in Marvel Snap for 2 years already? Absolutely phenomenal. Suddenly, I see what they were doing with the debris thing that they did a while ago. Debris, the rocks off Sandstorm. Suddenly, we are doing really powerful stuff. This card looks awesome. I cannot wait to Sandstorm into some demons and then Ozymandias. Then, like, this is absolutely excellent. One of my favorite cards. Genuinely nothing to explain about it here. Incredibly simple, straightforward design that just works. A card that they should put into the game now because I don't want to wait until the end of March to get it. Rama Tut at 4/5 looks to be a riff on a typical time traveler shenanigan, which, if I'm not mistaken, this is Kang the Conqueror. 4/5 use 3 on reveals from years past. Now, from what we can tell, there seems to be like a somewhat curated list of on reveals here. It's not literally every on reveal in the game. It's not every on reveal constantly updating. It's like a bunch of them. We went through in my Discord and sort of discussed various good and bad roles for this guy. Like, there are some really good ones. Stuff like, Black Panther into Brood into Spider-Man. Like, that stuff's just quite good. You could get all of those, but you could also, for example, do Destroyer and MODOK and then Terrax a bunch of rocks into your deck. There's a pretty big range here to the point that I worry that this guy's not really a competitive card. I think it's probably just like a card you jam in your RSM deck and play on turn 3 and be like, what's up? Something's happening this game. I think that's probably the most likely use case for this guy. I can't imagine that the average roll on this guy is enough above rate for you to want to do him on turn 4. But I can imagine that he's a pretty cool turn 3 RSM card. That's mostly where my head is at for this guy. I think that's kind of the limit of what he's able to do. I don't really know. I think he's more often going to be good for you than bad for you. But if he's good for you in obvious ways and you snap them, they leave. And if you snap early and he's bad for you, well, then you've sort of locked in a losing position. It's a very odd card with so much of it being put behind the veil of RNG. So it's obviously hard to evaluate, but I think the thing that sticks out to me is I don't think this card has good cube dynamics a lot of the time, or at least it has the potential to have bad cube dynamics. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal. And I will see you in the next one. Have a wonderful evening.